You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Today on the Useless Information Retrocast, you'll get to hear 8 different totally true stories, all in which someone or something got the last laugh. That includes a 1927 story of a man who invented the ultimate rattlesnake trap. At least that was until the snakes outsmarted him. And then you'll hear about a California man who got into a friendly feud with his local cable company, and it culminated with him dropping a truckload of pumpkins at their front door. Or how about a Florida man who was brought into court for failing to have his business name painted on his truck? Let's just say his solution, while it was legal, it was totally unreadable. All those stories, today's retro sponsor, and the question of the day, they're all coming up next on today's Retrocast. I am Steve Solomon, and this is the Useless Information Podcast.
Useless information.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of the Retrocast. Now, a few weeks ago I was sorting through some old files, and I noticed that I had several articles grouped together, and on each of them I had written what the search term was that I had used to find them. It simply said in quotes, "got last laugh." So I decided to search for more stories, and today I present to you the best of what I found. There were additional ones that I didn't think were up to par. These are the best of them. And here's the first one. On Tuesday, July 12th of 1927, news broke of an unusual invention by Cliff Stewart, a rancher from Bowman, California. Stewart claimed he had devised a clever new way to catch rattlesnakes, and it was so original that he planned to file for a patent. The concept was surprisingly simple. Stewart set a wooden board vertically, standing straight up and down into the ground, and he cut a hole through it just slightly larger than the diameter of a typical snake. And that hole sat about 2 inches or roughly 5 centimeters above the ground. Then what he did is he placed an egg on either side of the hole. So basically you have a board sticking straight up out of the ground with a hole in it just larger than the diameter of a snake with an egg on either side. Now the trap relied on the snake's appetite. Lured by the scent, it would slither up and swallow the first egg, and that would create a noticeable bulge in its body. But of course, being a snake, it's still hungry, and it would poke its head through the hole, reach for the second egg, and swallow that one also. But the problem was it now had 2 bulges in its body, one on one side of the board and one on the other side. Basically, the snake found itself stuck. It's unable to slither forward or backward. Well, local department store clerk Ned Zanaboni read about this in the paper, and he was skeptical. Curious to see the contraption in action, he visited Stewart's ranch the following Saturday, and what he found was both impressive and unintentionally hilarious. Oh yeah, the trap worked, but for only one snake. As that unlucky reptile laid wedge in his place, the rest of the rattlesnakes, they simply helped themselves to the remainder of the eggs that had been scattered nearby. According to the report, each snake swallowed about 12 eggs, and that left them bloated, and of course, they could hardly move. But nature had one final surprise in store. The engorged snakes slithered up to a nearby oak tree, coiled their bodies tightly around the trunk, and then squeezed. After wrapping themselves 3 or 4 times, they managed to crack all the eggs inside their bellies, essentially scrambling their breakfast with nothing more than brute force. So Stewart's invention may not have caught many snakes, but it certainly caught everyone's attention. In May of 1977, Joanne Cantor, a communications professor at the University of Wisconsin, published the results of a study exploring how men and women respond to jokes, especially when the punchline comes at the expense of one gender over the other. Cantor's research began in 1970 at the University of Pennsylvania, where she tested 34 male and 34 female students. Then she later repeated the experiment in 1975 at the University of Wisconsin with an even larger group. In this case, there were 68 men and 53 women. In both studies, the participants were given a series of jokes and asked to rate which one they found to be the funniest. But what the students didn't realize was that each joke came in 2 versions, one in which the woman was the butt of the joke and another where the man was. Cantor explained.
I took jokes that occurred between the male and female characters and had each written into two versions. One in which the male got the last laugh at the expense of the female, and one in which the female got the last laugh.
So here are some examples from the study. And in the first version, a man and a woman are at a cocktail party, and the man is the target.
Madam, you are very drunk. You are very, very drunk.
Sir, you are stupid. You are very, very stupid. But at least I have the consolation of knowing that tomorrow morning, when I wake up, I'll be sober.
And in the alternate version, the joke turns on the woman. In this case, a movie actor whose autobiography has just been published is approached by an actress and asked,
I saw your new book. Who wrote it for you?
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Who read it to you?
Interestingly, the outcome of both studies was consistent, and that was that participants found jokes funnier when the woman was the one being ridiculed. And surprisingly, it wasn't just the men who showed this preference. Women did too. In fact, Cantor noted,
Both males and females found a female victim of a joke to be funnier than a male victim, but in the last study, females held this bias more strongly than males did.
When asked why jokes at the woman's expense were more popular, Cantor offered up two possible explanations. The first was,
Humor for centuries or forever has been predominantly a male domain. Humor writers and performers were predominantly male, with men disparaging the female, but we're not used to seeing women disparaging the man.
And her second thought was,
Also, in our society, it's inappropriate for women to have a snappy or sarcastic comeback. So we perceive a man with a sarcastic comeback as witty and clever, but a woman who makes the very same comment is perhaps perceived as bitchy or bitter.
For those of us who remember life before the internet, paying bills used to be a tedious ritual. You know, you get your bill in the mail, you'd have to tear off the payment stub, it never tore off neatly. Then you'd write a check, stuff it in an envelope, lick the stamp. Yeah, you had to lick it back then. And then after you dropped it in the mailbox, you kept your fingers crossed and you hoped that it arrived before the due date. That is, if it wasn't lost in the mail. Well, Vacaville, California resident Bob Buell found the whole process to be a nuisance. You see, he preferred to pay his bills quarterly, not monthly, explaining,
I never get to that end of town.
But his local Cablevision office didn't quite share his philosophy. Every month, just like clockwork, their computer-generated system would send him a bill. And when he didn't respond with a payment, they'd follow up with increasingly, quote, friendly reminders, unquote. Now, Bob didn't ignore them, but he didn't exactly cooperate either. Instead, he returned the payment coupon without a check, scribbling sarcastic comments like,
I don't like your friendly reminders.
Eventually, two secretaries of the cable company decided to join in on the fun. And for Valentine's Day of 1977, they arranged for a personalized news strip to run on local broadcasts, and they wished Bob a happy Valentine's Day. Bob was amused and decided to fire back. This time he did mail back an actual check, and it was made out to General, that's spelled G-Y-N-R-A-L, Electric, I-L-E-K-R-I-K, Cablevision, K-U-B-Y-L-V-Y-S-O-N, General Electric Cablevision. He later said,
I guess I was surprised the check cleared. I guess the bank figured if I don't spell well, that's my problem.
The playful back and forth just escalated from there. For Halloween of 1977, Cablevision struck once again with another on-screen message. It read, quote, Hey kids, there's lots of special Halloween goodies at 100 Hemlock Street. See you there. Yuck yuck BE from your poison pen pals, unquote. BE, of course, being Bob Buell's initials. Now, you might think the parents would take the hint from the word poison and steer their children clear, but they didn't. That Halloween, the Ewell family had a flood of visitors, 200 trick-or-treaters in all. That's 5 times their usual count. Not to be outdone, later that night, Bob and his wife Diane, along with their 14-year-old daughter Wendy and their friend Frank Goldenberg, they loaded up a truck with pumpkins and drove it to the Cablevision office. There, they stacked the pumpkins in front of the main entrance and left a sign that read, quote, "The great pumpkin has risen from the pumpkin patch, bringing toys to all the children of the world, including a special treat for the good little girls at GE Cablevision. Love, Linus," unquote. And of course, Bob made sure that he was there the next morning to witness the reactions of the employees as they arrived at work. And with a grin, he declared,
"We're one up on them, but who knows what's coming next?"
So just this past weekend, my wife and I were having dinner with another couple, and I happened to mention that my paternal grandfather's original name was Abraham Litvak. That's Litwak. But by the time he married my grandmother Alice on June 2nd of 1928, he had changed his name to Jack Silverman. Now, he didn't just pull this name out of thin air, and that's because his mother's maiden name, my great-grandmother, her maiden name was Silberman with a B. Now, according to his daughter Bobby, that's my dad's sister, she told me a few years ago that he changed his name for business purposes, and that's because Jack sounded less Jewish-sounding than Abraham did. Anyway, my grandfather Jack was the longest lived of my entire family. He passed away on July 18th of 2014, and depending on which records you check, he was either 106 or 108 years old. And he certainly lived a long life, but it definitely wasn't the longest on record. And I have to tell you, I've come across stories over the years where people claim to be 125, 150, 200 years old, but of course none of that is verifiable. So I have a simple question for you. What is the age of the oldest verifiable person when she passed away? And of course it's a woman, because women tend to live longer. What is the age of the oldest verifiable person ever? Well, hang around for a bit and I'll let you know the answer at the end of this podcast.
You know, Bing, my throat's beginning to feel like the Sahara Desert at high noon.
The pipe's kind of hot and dry, huh?
Well, you haven't noticed any cool Sahara deserts around, have you?
Haven't seen a sign of one, not lately.
Well, I happen to have something cool right here in my picnic cooler. Some soft drinks in cans.
Well, you know, our sponsor, U.S. Steel, is going to be very glad to hear that.
Sponsor or no, I think canned soft drinks are just wonderful. They're simple to pack and light and easy to carry, and they save space in your picnic cooler, and they get cold fast, too.
And they cool you off fast, too.
Love the way cans seal in all the sparkle and zip, not to mention having no deposit and no returns.
Tell me something, Rosie, do you always carry that picnic cooler with you?
Well, you don't expect me to carry around canned soft drinks in my purse, do you?
I'll say one thing for carrying around a picnic cooler full of canned soft drinks.
What's that?
Well, it makes a lot more sense than carrying a refrigerator.
That commercial for U.S. Steel is from the August 1st, 1962 episode of the Bing Crosby Rosemary Clooney Show, and that came about after the two became close friends after working on the 1954 film White Christmas. Now, the show, which I've talked about before on the podcast, was simply the two of them singing songs, sometimes solo and sometimes as a duet. And in between each number, of course, they'd read scripts for the commercials, plus add a little bit of, banter between the two. Now, the show, which I've talked about before on the podcast, is simply the two singing songs, sometimes solo and at other times as a duet. And in between each number, they would read scripts for commercials, plus, of course, add a little bit of conversation. Interestingly, these songs were all pre-recorded. Then when the two had some free time, where they could meet up, they would then record the spoken sections of the show. As for U.S. Steel, it was formed in 1901 by financier J.P. Morgan, in which he merged Carnegie Steel, Federal Steel, National Steel, and a few smaller companies into one giant behemoth. The cost to do this was estimated at $492 million, which is around $18.8 billion today. And it wouldn't be long before U.S. Steel would become the first company ever to have a $1 billion valuation. In 1902, that's its first full year of operation, U.S. Steel accounted for an estimated 67% of all the steel produced in the United States. But the company, it was never efficient or innovative. Instead, it had the advantage of economy of scale. In addition, its workers were notoriously overworked and underpaid. Get this. until it was phased out in August of 1923. The men who worked to produce the steel ingots would work 12-hour shifts 7 days a week with little to no days off all year. Can you imagine? I checked, and steel production in the U.S. peaked in 1973 and of course has been going downhill ever since. And I'm sure you already know this, but China today produces more than half of the entire world's steel output. Now, they talk about the benefits of steel beverage cans in this episode, but of course they're hardly used for drinks today. We use aluminum instead. But I have to tell you, when I was a kid, I remember going through the woods or, looking in ditches, and there would be the rusted out remains of those steel cans. And I'll just throw in the fact that the first aluminum cans were introduced in 1958 by the Hawaii Brewing Company. They were based in Honolulu, and they used them for their Primo beer. And the cans would go mainstream the following year. That's when Coors introduced aluminum beer cans. But when Coca-Cola and Pepsi switched to aluminum cans in 1967, that brought a swift end to the prominence of steel beverage cans. And now for some footnotes to history, and I'm going to read these word for word as they originally appeared in the newspapers. And again, I'll point out that all these stories include the phrase, "got the last laugh." And our first story is dated December 28th of 1947. This appeared on page 9 of the Jackson Citizen Patriot. The headline on this one is, "Woman Fools Police But Overdoes Trick." Elkhart, Indiana, United Press. A woman who called the Elkhart Police Department and asked to be arrested was only kidding, but the cops got the last laugh. The woman said she was drunk and would they send a squad car to a tavern to pick her up. When police arrived, she had disappeared. A few minutes later, she called again from another tavern. This time, the desk lieutenant engaged her in a long conversation, explaining why the police could not come and arrest her. While he talked, other police raced to the tavern and arrested the befuddled woman before she had finished her conversation. This next story was published on March 21st of 1955 and appeared on page 17 of the Miami News. The headline on this one is, "Angler Loses Shirt, Pants, Rod to Fish." The fish got the last laugh on a fisherman who went casting in a rubber life raft near Matheson Hammock. Just when the fish was starting to bite, J.T. Garris, 637 Majorca Avenue, Coral Gables, had a blowout. His craft hit a snag and sank. In his attempt to drag the deflated boat to shore, Garris reported he lost his pants and shirt, his rod and reel, and his car keys. This next story appeared on page 6 of the Register in Santa Ana, California on October 24th of 1965. In bold print at the top, it says, "AA got last laugh on dry run." Pismo Beach, Associated Press. Members of the Alcoholics Anonymous got the last laugh on this dry run. A tavern operator who caters parties at the Veterans Memorial Building showed up with 2 assistants and $400 worth of bourbon. He banged on the door and announced, quote, "We're here with the booze," unquote. The doorkeeper opened up and said there must be some mistake. An AA meeting was in progress. The caterer checked his log and retreated red-faced. The group that ordered the drinks was meeting at the same place, same time, the following week. This fourth story appeared on page 10 of the Houston Chronicle on January 22nd of 1972. The headline reads, "He got last horse laugh." Detroit, United Press International. James Stoltz got the last laugh. A judge declared his ex-wife was not entitled to any of the $130,000 he won in the Irish sweepstakes after their divorce. Now, $130,000 back then is about $1 million today.
"Will God give his man, taketh not away,"
said Wayne County Circuit Judge Benjamin D. Burdick in denying Cora Stoltz's request that he set aside his original divorce decree of December 3rd. She argued that the ticket was in her husband's possession before the divorce and represented potential income. Stoltz, supporter at a new car dealership in suburban Westland, won the money December 28th after a long-shot horse named Kellane won the 2-mile sweepstake race at Leopardstown, Ireland. He says he hasn't received any of the money, has the ticket under lock and key, and expects to finally get about $80,000 once the government takes its share. $80,000 is about $615,000 today.
I wonder if she would have been willing to take the ticket instead of getting the house.
The judge said Friday after making his decision.
The ticket was worth $3 before it became a winner. She got the divorce she wanted,
said Burdick.
How that if any uncle had died after the divorce and left him $1 million? Would she have wanted me to set aside the divorce then?
And the last tidbit for today is dated October 22nd of 1972. This appeared on page 48 of the Houston Post. The headline on this one is, Eidie got last laugh. That's Eidie, E-I-D-D-E. Makes no sense, does it? It will in a bit. West Palm Beach, Florida, Associated Press. Eddie Walker's truck didn't have his name and address on the side, so West Palm Beach police took him before a municipal court judge to explain why. But when he got to court, a policeman assured the judge the proper lettering had been painted on the cab's side and the charge was dropped. Within minutes, Eddie Walker was standing beside his blue truck, gesturing to the cab's plump pink lettering, saying, quote, "See, I got letters just like they want," unquote. I was going to challenge my reading ability here, but the lettering read, quote, "Rek Luwaida Alf Hase Barever, Everth Gilut." Sounds like I'm drunk, doesn't it? Well, it turns out it really says Eddie Walker, Riviera Beach, Florida, Twilight Drive, and he printed all the letters backwards. Police said there's nothing in the law which says the letters have to face the right way. Well, I guess you could say he met the letter of the law even if the letters were all printed backwards. So early in the podcast, I asked you if you knew the age of the oldest woman, the one who lived the longest, and the age needed to be verified. That doesn't mean there weren't people that lived longer. This is the oldest verified age. Did you know? Well, the record is held by a French woman named Jean-Louise Comment, and I apologize to all the French speakers, including my wife, for my pronunciation. And she was born on February 21st of 1875. And here's a few details about her life. She was married at 21 years of age. Her husband was Fernand Nicolas Comment, and he was heir to a successful drapery business. And what this meant is she never had to work a day in her life. They had servants for the entirety of their marriage. In her spare time, she pursued her hobbies that included playing piano, cycling, swimming, tennis, roller skating, fencing, and hunting. Now, the couple did have one child. That's a daughter named Yvonne, and she had a son, a grandson named Frederick. But sadly, Yvonne died of pleurisy in 1934, which just happened to be her 36th birthday. So Jean, or Jeannie as we'd say in English, along with the boy's father Joseph, they helped to raise the young son. Now, Jean's husband Fernand died in 1942 at the age of 73, and get this, he died of cherry poisoning. Then her son-in-law Joseph died in January of 1963, and later that year in August, her grandson Frederick died in an auto accident. That left her with no heirs at all. So a couple of years later, in 1965, she sold her apartment to 47-year-old André Francois Raffray, and the deal allowed her to stay in her apartment as long as she lived. Not only that, he had to pay her 2,500 francs per month until the day she died. And this seemed like a really good deal because she was already 90 years old. The story is actually quite famous, and that's because he died in 1995 at the age of 77, and she was still alive. In the end, he had paid her more than double what the apartment was worth, and even after he passed, the family had to continue on with the payments. She did move into a nursing home at the age of 110 and died on August 4th of 1997. If you do the math, she was 122 years, 164 days old. Of course, while she was alive, they did question as to what the secret to her long life was, but she didn't have any good answers. Believe it or not, she was a casual smoker. She smoked until she was 117 years old, although typically she only did so after meals. She continued cycling until she was 100, and she never used heating during the winter in her home. Now get this, she ate fried and spicy foods all the time, and she consumed up to 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds of chocolate every single week. Boy, I better start eating some more chocolate. It's going to be tough. Now, as I said, others have claimed to be older, but they are all undocumented. I believe in her case, they do have her christening, and she appears in the census 1 year after her birth. So she was over 122 years old when she passed on. So you're probably wondering who's in second place. Well, that's a woman named Kane Tanaka who lived to 119 years, 107 days. She passed away on April 19th of 2022 in Japan. The oldest man was Jeremon Kimura. Again, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. He died on June 12th of 2013, also in Japan. He was 116 years, 54 days old when he passed. Now, as I'm recording this, the oldest current living person is Ethel Caterham in the UK. She's approaching 116 years of age. Well, that brings another Retrocast to a close. Now, my original plan was to release this episode last week, but I decided it was best to wait until after the July 4th holiday here in the US. And that's because what I found over the years is that my download numbers, they just plummet over big holidays. So I just decided to wait till the following week to release this episode. Just to remind you, you can find the Useless Information podcast on all the podcast platforms, both big and small, so don't forget to hit that follow button. The Useless Information podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network, so be sure to visit airwavemedia.com, and there you'll find an ever-expanding selection of some of the very best podcasts out there. Anyway, I'll be back shortly with a full-length story. I'm working on that already, so stay tuned for that. As always, thanks for listening, and take care, everyone. Bye.